Today I'm going to be talking to you about my experience teaching nuns science in India. I want to start with a little bit of an overview about the program in general. This is part of the Emory Tibet Science Initiative, or ETSI, which has been running for monks for quite some time, and I've taught the monks for a few years. So the basic outline is that the monastics have a 6-year curriculum through the ETSI program, where they have 1 week of every subject each summer, about 1 week. So they start their first year with about a week of philosophy, and that's focused on the Western philosophy of science. Then we do physics, biology, and neuroscience. And so the first year they have an overview of physics. The second year we cover mechanics. The third year is a little bit of atomic physics, the types of matter, heat, thermodynamics, and sound. The fourth year curriculum is electromagnetism, possibly relativity, and then the fifth year curriculum gets into light and quantum mechanics, and the sixth year curriculum is astronomy and cosmology. So, and again, the basic structure is that we have 2 lecture sessions in the morning of about an hour and a half each, and then in the afternoon, we typically break the group up into halves. So each session functions as a lab where we have half of the students to do more hands-on activities, and we have each group for only half. So it's 4.5 hours of instruction a day for 7 or 8 days. And again, that's what we try to cover. So it's very intense. So this past year was the first time that this has been offered for the nuns, and they're offering it separately from the monks, and the idea is to have it a week later. So the people who taught philosophy, or a subset of the people who taught philosophy to the monks, stay on to then teach philosophy to the nuns. I stayed on after teaching physics to the monks to teach physics to the nuns. We typically teach in pairs. We're now transitioning in some of the monastics to be co-teachers themselves, but otherwise it's 2 Western instructors and then a translator, and then typically some monastic assistants. So with the nuns, it was 2 of us female faculty of physics. They were very excited to have female instructors. Our translator, Tashi, is the science teacher at Jangchop Choling Nunnery. So she was our translator, and then we had a few nuns assisting us who spoke very good English and knew science already. So far, my understanding of the program is that there's only going to be 1 cohort of nuns. So for the monks, they're actually, every year, like all of the Geshe students are coming in, but for the nuns, there was 1 group, I think selected by their nunnery, or perhaps they volunteered, and they came from a lot of different institutions. Unfortunately, I don't have the list with me to name all of the institutions. Many of the nuns were from Jangchop Choling, some were from Dromaling, and then some were from Jamyang Choling. But I know that there are lots of other institutions as well. So some of the nuns spoke very good English, but many of them did not. So we were primarily teaching in English, and then everything was translated. So my impressions, the nuns were unsurprisingly brilliant. And and especially since I had taught the monks 3 times, in my mind, it was always that comparison between the monks and nuns. And I think part of the difference is that this was a smaller group, and so they knew that they were representing their institution, that not everyone was having this opportunity. They were working incredibly hard and asking really good questions. The first day, we weren't quite sure where they were going to be. We knew that because they were coming from different institutions, their scientific background was going to be different in the room. So we asked them on the first day, we had brought in whiteboards so that they could always work on whiteboards, to draw a representation of what they thought science was, since physics goes first, so we knew we were first. And a few of them went with an approach of actually drawing something, but most of them wrote out a very long paragraph in Tibetan defining it. And so we had them go around the room and share, and then had it translated back to English. And we were just blown away by how much they had clearly learned from the philosophers and the definitions they were giving us about scientific knowledge, how scientists construct knowledge, the limits of scientific knowledge, I know I learned something in that session. So that showed us right away that they knew a lot. The other thing that really distinguished how amazing they were, and the philosophers said this was true, and we saw it as well, the average score on the final exam was very, very high. I think the highest student had a perfect score, but we had a lot of people who were really close. I think our lowest scoring student was close to where the average score for the monks typically is. Now, I haven't taught the first year curriculum before, so it's a little bit of apples to oranges, but just the level of knowledge they had at the end was really phenomenal. They were really hardworking, so with the monks, the class I typically have is about 100 people there. For the nuns, we had 40. So we were also trying to take the approach of integrating hands-on activities into everything that we were doing. So not lecture in the morning, lab in the afternoon, but always having them actually work with things as much as possible. We did have slides to introduce some of the ideas, but they also had a textbook they were working closely with. So they had the fourth session free because we weren't breaking them up to be in 2 different labs. They found a local Tibetan teacher who had experience teaching math, because many of them really had a low level of math background. Some of them really weren't familiar with decimals. And so that's challenging to teach physics and do experimental physics with people who aren't familiar with decimals and dividing decimals. So they actually sought out a teacher and brought him in, since that fourth session was free, and they had a math class then. So some of the nuns knew a higher level of math already, and I'm sure they found other things to do with their time then, but they sought that out and made that happen. They were clearly studying in the evenings. They would come in the morning with questions saying, well, we found on Google this different definition of the primary colors. Can you explain why the textbook says this and Google says this? And so it was like that every day, that they would come in with questions based on what we presented before. And our assistants were working with them as tutors, so they were able to really achieve a lot. The other thing that I noticed is just working with them, and I think connecting as women was really different, that especially since so many of them spoke English, when they were working on different activities and maybe struggling to get the battery to light the light bulb or whatever they were doing, I could just plop down with them. And whoever in the group spoke the best English would immediately be the translator, and we would work together. Some of them would speak Tibetan at me and see how I did. Not so good. But just really being friendly, and I had some great conversations with them during the tea break, so they were just really, really lovely. And I'll share one story that it was so wonderful working with them for that week, and I have been told that I will be able to teach them the second year curriculum this year. I'll be working with a different colleague, one who's actually from the same institution as me, so I'm excited about that. She's thrilled to have this opportunity. One of the things we did, we were teaching in the Drepung Losing Science and Meditation Center, which I know His Holiness just inaugurated, and they had these computer labs upstairs with a few dozen computers. We had to take the plastic off the chairs. This was brand new. But I had brought a simulation of how atoms actually work, how you can put things into the nucleus and electrons, and it's actually already been translated into Tibetan. So we had this simulation they could do in Tibetan. We put it on the computers. This would be a great way for them to understand the atom. Well, then one of the assistants brought up the fact that many of them had never used a computer before. And this was a fairly simple simulation, but if this is their first introduction to computers, okay. So we had them gather up before we went into the lab, and we wanted to identify the people who had more computer skills, to have them kind of sit down first and then have other people work with them. So we said, okay, who knows how to use computers? And I think we had 2 people stand up and come forward and say, okay. And we're like, oh no, what are we going to do? And at that point, they start talking to each other, being like, okay, no, in Tibetan, you know computers. And finally, we had about 1/3 of them shoved forwards. And it went amazingly. Working in there, they were working together, they were playing with the simulation, they were experimenting, they were asking questions, they were taking selfies with the computers, they were taking pictures of each other. And it was I think it was really productive as a learning opportunity, and it was also just really fun to be a teacher in that environment. And I hope that they had fun. They had fun too. So I'm thrilled that I get to go back now, understanding more about the equipment that they have there and knowing a little bit more about the background of the nuns and the sort of questions they were asking their first year. I'm really thrilled to be able to continue on and teach them the second year curriculum, which is mechanics, which I've done a few times for the monks.
You had mentioned one cohort of nuns.
Yes.
Does that mean that this coming year you're teaching the same nuns, but there's no second group coming in learning from the beginning? But with the monks, each year there's a new group coming in? You should protest.
So I'm not associated with Emory University, and so there's a lot that goes on at Emory that I'm not aware of, and I know a lot of this just depends on funding. My understanding was, I believe it was the Templeton Foundation specifically gave Emory funding to bring a cohort of nuns through. The main funding for the monks is actually wrapping up, such that the plan is to do this coming summer and one further year of sending Western instructors to work the way we have been at the monasteries. And after that, the hope is that we can sustain this program, since His Holiness wants this to really be a permanent part of the curriculum, largely through monastic instructors with some Western support. So it's when we've had conversations with that, it's also unclear what the plan is to move this cohort through the full 6 years. So I know many of us would love the nuns to have the same experience, and it might just be funding. Mm-hmm.
My experience is you need to talk to Geshe Losang Nege, and and say, oh, it's very important that the women have equal education as the monk, especially since this is coming from Western funding, and people will ask about this, And I know Geshe Dado Namgyal is all for it, but they need to hear this repeatedly, how important it is. Yeah. And I think especially because it is Western funded, and people will want to know that, that the women are having the equal opportunity.
Thank you. I will definitely push for that. I know that myself and the other female physicists especially want to see this continue to happen. It was also clear based on the final exams that some of the nunneries have a better educational preparation than others. So I don't know if that's something that we could do to actually look at that and maybe then try to do some supplemental instruction for some of the institutions where the nuns weren't succeeding as much. My first year, even in the United States, working with undergraduate students, as a female instructor in physics in particular, there can be a lot of tension working with male students. I teach at a women's college, so that's not something I'm used to doing. I had spoken with a few people before I went, trying to understand what it would be like, and got some varying answers along the lines of it will make no difference whatsoever to they'll be a little shy. And when I got there, I didn't actually feel that it made a difference until I interacted with the nuns. The Tibetans and the monastics are just such warm, caring, incredibly loving people that even just with the little bit of shyness and the little bit of a boundary that I think the monastics are putting up, to me, I still don't feel it. Like, I don't necessarily feel like they're uncomfortable with me until I compare how comfortable the nuns are with me. So yeah, I don't have anything specific other than really seeing how different the experience with the nuns was, and comparing stories with some of the male instructors who find that the monks are engaging with them a little bit more like how the nuns engage with me. I think both of the philosophy instructors they had before us were male, and so I think part of their excitement of us teaching them was that they went from having, Western male instructors to having two enthusiastic, energetic women come in the room. person I was teaching with this past year, Heidi Manning, she's now dean of a college. So, you know, we're all going in these different roles, but yeah, many of us are very high in our profession. I'm not there yet. But
You just mentioned how teaching the nuns impacted your interest in Buddhism.
Okay, so the first time that I met nuns was actually meeting Venerable and Venerable Dancho in last December. That was my first experience interacting with nuns. So working with a group of the Tibetan nuns, yeah, having that connection with them was really special. I guess in the way they encourage us to teach science within the ETSI curriculum, we're discouraged from trying to connect it to too much to Buddhism ourselves as the instructors. There's certainly an encouragement of giving space for the monastics to make those connections. With the monks, different instructors have actually made time for them to go out and debate certain topics. We hadn't done that for the nuns, partially because the first year is just so incredibly cramped. I think it's something we'll try to do for the nuns in this coming year curriculum. But from the questions that they were asking, some of the content I had taught the nuns in the first year overlapped with what I taught the monks in the third year, and there were some similar questions. So I can see that they are interacting with the teachings and what they're studying in their traditional education like the same way. And so that's really exciting to see that. Like there is this gender separation, but it at least feels like the intellectual curiosity they're bringing, the extent to which they're practicing is really the same. So it's, especially as a very feminist Westerner, seeing that there can be this gender separation. Obviously, even ETSI is not treating them equally. They're not quite getting the same support. They're not quite getting the same education. But seeing that their practice and what they're trying to do and that their intellectual engagement with it is equal or possibly better, that's inspiring.
I was asking more about how it's impacted your practice.
My practice. I think for me, because they were more warm and had less of a boundary with me, I'm aware when I'm there that I'm in a teacher role. And that culturally there's going to be a certain hierarchy or respect there. But seeing that there can also be a warmth and almost affection has changed how I can think about my teachers. That I don't necessarily need to have like a cold distance, but can actually have affection and warmth, but still having that respect. So there's kind of two parts to that I think, seeing how they were interacting with me, knowing that I'm not a spiritual teacher for them, but still in that teacher role. I think that's something that kind of changed how I view my teachers. I would say my spiritual teachers. At this point, I don't have secular teachers anymore.